Can you kind of set the stage of what it is Trump is doing with Venezuela and El Salvador, the relationship between Trump and Maduro and Nayib Bukele, and who these kind of figures are?
We can start with Venezuela because, it's interesting. At the beginning, it looked like there might have been kind of a diplomatic detente, right? Where the special envoy Grenell goes and visits the first official actual visits to Miraflores, the presidential palace in Caracas. They reach this agreement. Grenell takes some of the U.S. citizens back with him. They agree to receive some of these deportation flights, and it seemed like things were going in the right direction. But then the hardliners in Trump's coalition won. And so the Rubios, the Maria Elvira Salazars, all of these who wanted a hardline position against the government in Venezuela. And so then we saw basically a return to the maximum pressure strategy of Trump's first term, which Biden largely kept in place. I would say the only thing that Biden changed was this Chevron license, which Trump has now rescinded, ordering them to wind down operations. And so we're back to the maximum pressure strategy. Grenell, in an interview with the Epoch Times, said, no, Trump doesn't want regime change, but he's doing everything last time that he was implementing in order to achieve regime change in Venezuela. And so obviously Venezuela, because of the strained diplomatic relationship, said we're not going to receive direct deportation flights from the U.S. anymore. One of the ways that Trump has kind of worked around this is securing a deal with Bukele, who seems intent on turning his country into the prison, the slave house of Latin America. And I use those kind of really strong language deliberately. He's built these mega prisons in his country, and they're meant to kind of respond to his own security strategy, which has been very popular, admittedly so, inside of El Salvador, but basically violating any kind of due process, human rights, civil rights that did exist, jailing anybody and everybody that is suspected of having any ties to organized crime or gangs, as they call them in El Salvador, and now opening it up to basically renting it out so that people who are being deported from the U.S. can now be jailed there. And that's precisely what happened. So the first group that got sent there, apparently in violation of a judicial injunction, were sent on a plane to El Salvador with a lot of fanfare. They released all kinds of really gross propaganda videos, just really denigrating human beings, shaving them on camera. And there's reports also of kind of striking them and insulting them and all the rest of it. So basically the treatment that they've been applying to Salvadorans who have been detained to these migrants, all based on this accusation that their ties to a gang that was born in Venezuela, but really kind of grew in terms of its influence inside of the United States, called Tren de Aragua. Now, the curious thing is that it turns out many of the people were identified by their tattoos or their shoes or just by their faces by relatives who assure that they are not tied to organized crime or gangs at all. In fact, there was another plane. So now, because the U.S. doesn't send planes directly to Venezuela, what's been happening is they send them either to Mexico, and then from Mexico they go to Venezuela. This last one came from Honduras. It's actually the second flight, if I'm not mistaken, coming from Honduras. And the Interior Minister of Venezuela, Diosdado Cabello, said none of them have any ties to Tren de Aragua. So it's just an effort to criminalize all migrants, to criminalize all Venezuelans in particular. And it's really tragic, ironic in a sense, because in the actual text of the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, he says that Venezuela deliberately sent them into the United States to sow unrest and all the rest of it. Also even accusing Maduro of being the Cartel de Sol is just this fantasy that they have. But if you look at a recent report from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, they pointed out that in cases of Cuba, Venezuela, what drives migration? Unilateral coercive measures, sanctions, the oil blockade of Venezuela, the blockade of Cuba. They're not being sent there. They are fleeing their countries that are undergoing hardship as a result of U.S. foreign policy. And now to turn that around and to say that they're actually being sent deliberately, it's so grotesque. And then to take them and throw them into a prison like this when many of them didn't have due process. I mean, just recently, I think it was yesterday, came out, the judge wants to know if his order was violated, which he has the right to do. That's what the judicial branch of government is meant to do. It'd be a check on the executive. They're now calling it a state secret. So first, all the fanfare, publishing videos everywhere, photos, celebrating. Oh, now it's a state secret. Now we can't say because it might violate. It's absolutely patently absurd, and it's all part of this agenda. It's a racist, xenophobic agenda to really tar all migrants. And one final note on this, because it's really quite tragic as well. So something around 550,000 Haitians, Cubans, Venezuelans, they accepted what's called the parole program in the US. So it's not like parole in prisons. It's just a term they use. So basically, if they had a sponsorship, a community, a family member who's willing to take them in, they would have a 2-year permission to be inside of the United States while they looked for other kinds of either asylum or permanent residency or another work visa, whatever it was. Those have been rescinded, and they've been told to leave by, sometime in April. I thought Trump said he was only going to kick out the criminal elements, right? But because of this effort to try all Venezuelans to Tren de Aragua, people are believing this. Like, oh no, they're all illegals, they're all criminals, they all should go. Some of the people who were sent to El Salvador presented themselves at their CBP-1 appointments, and now they're languishing in a prison in Central America, which says a lot about Bukele as well in terms of the lengths he's willing to go to appease Trump. He obviously really wants to be in favor with him because he's got his own authoritarian regime that he's trying to cultivate there, obviously perpetuating himself in power despite the fact that El Salvador doesn't permit re-election, but yet there he is.
Because you just mentioned these disgusting, what do you call them? Like slavery prison?
Slave house, yeah.
Slave houses.
The prison house of Latin America.
So we have an image of a video. I don't actually know who made this. I assume it's someone from the Trump administration. It's a disgusting, disgusting video. And the title of it on Twitter from the Breaking 911 Twitter account is "Watch Venezuelan Gang Members Deported by Trump Arrive at Mega Prison El Salvador."
I just wanted to point out to people that it might not be something that they're familiar with from a filming perspective. This was highly produced. This took a lot of money and a lot of preparation to produce this. It's all very deliberate.
Yeah. In fact, let's start from the beginning without the sound, just in case we have to cut out the music part. So here it is. Yeah.
That's a dolly shot.
A dolly, right? Yeah. It's really scary also the way they're masked.
Right.
The police or the officers or soldiers, whatever. Ugh.
And then just all of this from their body positioning to what they're doing to them here, it just ultimately dehumanizing.
Yeah. It's really awful.
Jesus.
So just checking, I'm pretty sure that video was made by the Salvadorian government.
Okay.
Because it was posted by Nayib Bukele.
Okay, well, yeah. Right.
It would explain its high production value.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they do. It's part of his strategy, is to precisely kind of parade these images around the world saying, look how tough we are on on the gangs. When, I read this one report where somebody, because they had a Real Madrid tattoo, they're like, that's a gang tattoo.
Right.
And that's why they were
football soccer team for people. Yeah.
Yeah. I read recently, I don't know if it was that person or another person who was grabbed, got a sworn affidavit from their tattoo artist, basically saying, yeah, no, that's not what that is. It's just unbelievable.
Just take a look at someone recounting their experience.
Lo peor, malísimo, me tratan mal de la patada. Ahí en la carpa me entraron a coñazo y me quitaron mis pertenencias, mi cédula, mi dinero y mi teléfono.
Venimos con un trato inhumano, nos han tratado demasiado mal, nos dejaron esclavos y tenemos justicia, pues, porque mucha gente inocente está haciendo, personas que no tenemos delito, ni siquiera una multa, que nos quieren tratar como delincuentes, simplemente porque tenemos un tatuaje, un nombre de un hijo de uno, allá quedó mi familia, mis 2 hijos.
Me agarraron hace 10 meses, tengo 10 meses detenido, 8 meses deportado y el trato de inmigración ha sido demasiado brutal. Gracias a Dios ya estamos cerquita de llegar a nuestro país, que es lo que queremos.
People are saying, oh, this is great. Bukele is really helping make El Salvador a safer place. What's your response to that?
I mean, his policies have certainly impacted the level of crime that's happening inside of El Salvador, and it explains why he is so popular. But of course, it's something that is effective in a country like El Salvador. It's a very, very small country. It's one of the smallest countries in the world with a very limited population. In fact, here in Mexico, there was a debate happening where he criticized Mexico and its security policy with a really kind of absurd argument. He basically said, he's like, Mexico is made up of states just the way that the United States is. And he's like, something like 29 of them actually have a smaller population than El Salvador. Why don't they just do state by state and reduce crime that way, the way that we've done it in a territory like Mexico? Organized crime groups don't respect state boundaries, and that strategy would not work. But even if we were to apply it, we're talking about jailing millions upon millions of Mexicans, an equivalent in terms of population, for that to work. It only works there because of the small population can actually conceivably jail enough people to actually bring crime down. But there's no attention to the root causes, right? There's no concern about the future of young people. What are the economic prospects for a country like El Salvador with the reputation that it is now earning throughout the world? What's going to happen when, the kids who are 14, 15, 16 years old grow up and there's no jobs for them? Is that the future that waits for them? Just another, bunk in one of these mega prisons that he's building? And it's actually an economic policy for him too, because he's charging the US to house these migrants. They asked Rubio, well, we've heard reports that a lot of the people who have been sent have no criminal records whatsoever. He's like, well, if it turns out they don't, El Salvador can just deport them to Venezuela then, right? Like, just, we're going to wash our hands of it. I've been reading this analyst, Aaron Melchick, I think is his name. I apologize. But he's been really driving this point home, which is just like, there is no law anywhere in the US books that allows them to do what they did to these Venezuelan migrants to send them to El Salvador. There's no actual way to justify it, and yet they do it. Just yesterday, now they want, because they're not allowed to deport or expel people according to this order by a federal judge, now they're extraditing them as a way of working around it. So it shows just how aggressive they are. They'll do anything to continue with this policy. That's a really important alarm bell to sound, because if they do it to them, they'll do it to everybody. That's the point, right? Like, they want to see how far they can get. And then that part means maybe they'll start, or as they already have, going after green card holders. There's even talk about them sending U.S. citizens to El Salvador. If they can get away with it, they will do it.